Welcome to another episode, fellow listeners. This is your host today, Bill Banham. And joining me on this episode is Ashley Hinchcliffe, founder of Mass Marketing and one of the strongest voices challenging how learning and development shows up inside organizations. Ashley has spent the last decade working at the intersection of L&D, behavioral change, and internal communications, helping people, teams rethink how learning is positioned, experienced, and adopted. Ashley's work focuses on a simple but uncomfortable truth, which is great learning fails all the time, not because of the content, but because no one engages with it. And in this conversation, we're going to explore why traditional L&D campaigns struggle to cut through what learning teams can borrow from marketing without becoming salesy, and how L&D can shift from nice to have to genuinely business critical. So this episode is all about influence, credibility, and designing learning that people actually choose to engage with. Ashley, how are you doing today? Thank you very much for joining me.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, let's get into it then. Many L&D teams say engagement is their biggest frustration. Ashley, from your perspective, what are the most common assumptions that learning teams make that quietly undermine adoption before a program even launches?
I would say one of the biggest ones is our own mindsets, and that tends to be what holds us back. So a lot of teams that I work with, and I've observed this repeatedly across my tenure in this wonderful, weird world that we live in, we assume people want to learn. We assume there is this implicit desire to seek out our learning products. And as a consequence of that, we undertake a process of purchasing, curation, creation, and believe that that act alone is enough to justify someone to interrupt the middle of their working day, ignore the 53 Teams messages they have, tell their manager on their back to go away and go and do that wonderful learning. And that is honestly the crux of a lot of our problems.
Okay, love it. Succinct, and yet a beautiful answer. So a lot of learning initiatives are designed around good intentions rather than real behavior change. What does behavior-led learning actually look like in practice, Ashley? And as part of your answer, how is it different from traditional program design?
I think we often don't actually speak to our end users. So we're creating products for people that aren't involved in that kind of product creation process. So if you look at the typical format of how L&D creates, we'll usually have an SME or a leader or leadership team come and tell us, okay, we need X, Y, or Z. We then create it. And then we, again, expect the audience to swarm us with engagement. It's the equivalent of buying someone a gym membership that they never asked for and then querying why they haven't attended said gym. It's the exact same situation, right? So we need to think a lot more about our learning as a product and understanding that the experiences that we're creating need to be curated and highly relevant to the people's role. So that comes out across in the discovery sessions I do all the time. I've done over 200 hours of research with employees across the globe. And the reality is they all say very similar things. I don't have time. And that's because they don't see value in learning. So they don't want to give you their time. They don't want to give you their most equitable resource, which is their time. But equally, they want learning experiences that are contextual, relevant, and help them not only be proficient in the role they're doing now, but also help them to escalate or evolve their career in the direction of travel that they want. But they don't have time to go peruse an LMS with, 5,000 e-learning modules on it. That's just not a dynamic that any employee can humor, I suppose. And that does hold us back.
Okay, let's talk a bit more about what you mentioned more in your first answer, which is the need to sell, to market a learning program. Learning teams are often asked to market their programs, but many resist that idea. Where do you think that resistance comes from? And what misunderstandings about marketing perhaps still exist within learning and development?
So I would say, I must admit, I don't see too much resistance, but obviously I'm in a bit of an echo chamber. I'm a marketeer, so I doubt people are interacting with me who are resistant to that. So that feels a little bit like a false truth. However, if we go back to my initial answer to you, which is this implicit belief that people want to learn, well, why do we need to do marketing then? I've heard people genuinely say, well, they should want to learn because they work here. And that's just not the reality of our modern world. I was literally talking to someone earlier today and I was saying, we are competing with Netflix and Instagram and these beautiful things called smartphones, right? We are competing with all of that. It doesn't have to be learning to be our competition. We are competing in an attention economy for our employees' attention. And if we don't do marketing, there's absolutely no way for us to ever elevate beyond noise.
Okay, love it. So let's assume that those L&D professionals have got buy-in. L&D, of course, is under increasing pressure to prove out the impact, maybe even prove out the ROI. Beyond attendance and completion rates, what are some meaningful signals that a learning initiative is actually working?
Well, again, it kind of goes back to the quality of the learning experience in the first place, right? I think a lot of us are stuck measuring completions, attendance, smile sheets, bums on seats, whatever you want to call it, because that is really the only information we have available. We're creating a product at the mandate of someone else, and then that product is unlikely to be linked with any real tangible business measurements. So really, we need to rewind back a little bit more in terms of how we interact with the business. This is where things like performance consulting can come in really handy, because instead of someone saying, hey, we want you to create this, you can drill down into that a little bit more and go, oh, what problem are you trying to solve? Could we solve it with this X, Y, or Z? So I know a very small handful of very talented learning professionals who are only building learning experiences that are directly related to a business parameter, whether that be reductions in attrition, timed proficiency, whatever. So there's a direct line between that ROI. In many cases, L&D is just not able to do that because they've inherited a lot of legacy products. Their data systems are siloed, and therefore it's quite difficult for us to really measure. But that's what we want to be measuring, right? If we've got board level scrutiny and we're saying, hey, but like everybody liked it, our NPS score is like 100, brilliant, cool. That doesn't retain your budget, and that's going to probably see your head count go down. So the only real way is speaking CFO. Right? Did it save money or did it reduce risk? If you haven't really done those two things, you're probably going to struggle to evidence value in the true context of the business.
Okay, save money, reduce risk. I agree with both of those, but surely the point of going on to a new program is to learn new stuff and be better at your job, be more proficient, be able to do things maybe faster, maybe use technologies in better ways. What would you say those things are pretty important too?
I would still say when you really boil all of that down, it still equates to save money, right? Increases in productivity mean you're getting more bang for your buck. The juice is worth the squeeze kind of thing. So again, I'm being very rudimental and very simple, but a lot of, like, if we look at, say, soft skills, first of all, if we rewind, I don't think that everything should be measured, right? There is some element of providing people with the opportunity to develop skills because they want to and because that's good practice in terms of building communication skills, AI skills, so on and so forth. But where we're spending big budgets and where we know there's going to be a lot of scrutiny, we do need to consider these factors, particularly in terms of how can we prove ROI? So if you want to look at it that way rather than did it save money, but how can I prove ROI? So if I've spent 80 grand on something, how do I evidence to the business that that 80 grand was well spent?
So in addition to cost savings, also the scalability, that's the return on that investment, so how much more is the company getting by investing in those learning initiatives as opposed to just saving money on not having to hire so many people because you've got someone who has more core competencies. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think it's just very difficult for us to do that. We don't have, in many cases, like most businesses I've worked with have really limited access to data systems. So they have their LMS or their LXP, but they don't have access to even their HRIS backend. And so how can we start to really understand what the impact of our learning is having when we're so siloed? So I think it is really about almost reverse engineering a little bit and thinking more about, okay, moving forward, how do we, if we're going to have big spend, how do we measure that? What are we trying to achieve before we even create it? These are things that we should be asking. Certainly what I have to ask myself as a marketer when I was spending my marketing budget on campaigns, which is kind of why I launched Mass, because I was just like, how are people spending this amount of money and not being asked to justify it? But I think the reckoning is coming, really, I do.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So if you sat down in a typical L&D planning meeting, Ashley, what's one conversation you think should be happening, but perhaps really is?
Can we get rid of the majority of our learning? And I know that sounds really controversial, but again, in my experience, a lot of it just isn't getting used, and it just creates noise and difficulty for the end user in terms of clutter. No one is going and perusing the LMS. As I said, it's not like Netflix where I can spend 20 minutes just looking at, what's coming up, and I'll save that to my list. And that's not how it works. These people are very time poor. So they're already in a position where I don't really have the time for this. And if we're then cluttering that experience with a lot of really redundant, old legacy content, it's all about refining and improving that user experience. And I think doing a real training needs analysis across the business, you're very likely to find that there's no real justification for the volume of learning offering that most organizations have.
Are you a proponent then of shorter form content when it comes to learning? I often talk to folks who say, video content should be less than 10 minutes, for example. Folks have less of an attention span at the moment, perhaps because they're watching too much Netflix, for example. Given your last answer there, are you a proponent for less is more very often?
I'm a fan of curation when it comes to the learning experience itself and meaningfully curating. I see that's what our job is these days. It's not a case of buying lots of stuff and putting it in a place and thinking we've done our job, brilliant, done and dusted. We need to be meaningfully curating and personalizing as much as we can. In answer to your question, I would revert back to what is it that we're trying to achieve. So rather than saying people are poor and making a somewhat logical deduction that, yes, sure, learning content should be short and micro-learning is great and it should be video and rich media and stuff. Again, we need to go back a little bit, and instead of thinking about that, okay, what is it we're trying to achieve? Again, what comes up in my conversations a lot, people like face-to-face interactions. They like blended experiences. When it's a program and there's that opportunity for spaced repetition and application, there's a lot more opportunity for people to actually acquire those skills and then apply them in the workplace. We can't necessarily accomplish that with microlearning. It has its place, and just-in-time learning does as well, like in the workflow, but it depends what skill or proficiency you're trying to enable people with, I think, as to whether that modality would be appropriate.
Wonderful. And just finally for today, looking ahead to the next few years, we are living in a rapidly evolving world augmented by AI and such. But looking ahead over the next few years, what skills or mindsets do you think will matter most for learning leaders who want to stay relevant and influential?
Good question. I would say design/UI/UX, so like user experience and design, and the quality of our platforms and products is just nowhere near what it should be in contrast to the modern world. Equally, data analytics and being better at not only gathering the relevant data, but being able to analyze it and assess it and contextualize it. And finally, I would say this, but I think marketing and communication skills are already crucial, as are the other two, truthfully. But this is the direction of travel. We need more hats. We're not instructional designers anymore. We've got our products. How do we build on that and evolve and really build a community around our product?
Love that answer. Ashley, if folks want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm usually ranting about something and posting some weird pineapple stuff. So yeah, Ashley Hinchcliffe on LinkedIn. And no, I'm not married to John Hinchcliffe. People ask that all the time. Good friend of mine, but no.
Perfect. Well, that just leads me to say for today, Ashley Hinchcliffe, not married to John Hinchcliffe. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. That should be my subtitle on LinkedIn, shouldn't it?